HOA bullies attack a black woman, not knowing she's a Navy SEAL operative. The first hit came before the coffee finished brewing. It was just after 7 a.m. when Danielle Brooks stepped out onto her porch, barefoot, wearing an old Tulane hoodie and faded jeans, a quiet morning on the edge of her new home in Whispering Pines. The air smelled like cut grass and asphalt warming under the rising sun. She was halfway through sipping her first cup when the sound of tires on gravel made her freeze. 3 golf carts, modified with black decals and oversized tires, rolled up to the curb like they were on a mission. One of them even had flashing amber lights mounted on top. Danielle's eyes narrowed. She'd seen patrols before. This wasn't that. This felt different, coordinated, aggressive. The lead cart parked sideways across her driveway. Out stepped a woman with frosted blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, clipboard in hand, and a polo shirt that clung to her like authority. Her name tag, oversized and unnecessary, read, Marlene Thatcher, HOA President. Behind her came 2 men, one short and thick like a bulldog, the other tall, wiry, with mirrored sunglasses that didn't quite hide his smirk. Neither wore a name tag. Neither looked like they'd come to talk. Danielle didn't move from the porch. She took another sip of coffee and waited. Marlene approached like a prosecutor, her voice clipped and smug. Miss Brooks, we need to speak with you regarding multiple violations on your property. Danielle looked down at her yard. Fence intact, grass short, driveway swept. The only thing out of place was the flagpole she had installed 2 days ago. An old black flag with a trident stitched in faded thread hung from it. I wasn't aware HOA rules had issues with flags, Danielle said calmly. They don't, Marlene said, glancing back at her clipboard. But unauthorized structures are subject to review, and your perimeter fencing. There's nothing wrong with my fence. Bulldog stepped forward. It's not about what's wrong. It's about compliance. And we're here to enforce that, the tall one added, cracking his knuckles like this was the prelude to something physical. Danielle's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed level. Unless you have a court order or you're sworn law enforcement, you're trespassing. Marlene smiled, fake and slow. We have authority vested by the HOA charter. We can perform inspections if non-compliance is suspected. That's not the same thing as having legal jurisdiction. Maybe not, Bulldog muttered, but sometimes consequences don't wait for courts. Danielle took 1 step off the porch. Calm. Controlled. Boots planted in the dirt. She wasn't a threat. Not yet. I'm going to ask you one time, she said. Leave my property. Marlene lifted her phone and began recording. You're escalating, Miss Brooks. No, Danielle said, eyes on Bulldog. You brought escalation with you. And then Bulldog lunged. It was fast, messy, unprovoked. His hand reached for her wrist, but it never made it. Danielle shifted her weight, twisted, and brought her forearm down in a hard arc. The man's hand dropped like it had hit live wire. He stumbled back, holding his wrist. Did you just hit me? He barked, stunned. I deflected. There's a difference. Tall guy stepped in, pulling something from his belt. A plastic zip tie? Danielle's hand flashed forward before he could blink. His sunglasses flew into the dirt, and he landed face first in the lawn, groaning. Marlene screamed, You assaulted compliance officers. You're lucky I'm not in uniform, Danielle said coldly, because if I were, you wouldn't be walking away. Sirens didn't wail. No cops arrived. Instead, neighbors peeked from behind blinds. A few even came out onto their porches, phones recording. Danielle knew exactly what that meant. This would be on Facebook by noon. Marlene backed away, voice quivering now. You'll hear from our legal team. This is not over. No, Danielle said, eyes unwavering. It's just beginning. By the time the golf carts pulled away, Danielle's hands were steady, but her heart was pounding. Not from fear. From restraint. Inside the house, she leaned against the door and took a deep breath. She hadn't moved like that in years. Not since Bagram. Not since the last mission that got her discharged with a medal and a warning, disappear or become a weapon. She had chosen peace. A small town, a quiet life. And now, someone thought they could bully her back into silence. Danielle walked into the kitchen, picked up her phone, and called someone she hadn't spoken to in 6 months. It rang once. "Brooks," a gruff voice answered. "Hey," she said, steady. "You still have that thing in storage?" There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again." "Yeah." "Me neither." "You sure?" "I'm sure." "What happened?" "Someone picked the wrong flag." She hung up. The sun kept rising. The flag outside stirred in the breeze. And behind Danielle's calm exterior, the steel came awake. She wasn't just a woman defending her home anymore. She was a trained operative. And now they'd crossed her line. The next morning, Danielle didn't drink coffee on the porch. She walked the perimeter of her property instead, silent boots crunching across gravel, eyes scanning the line of the fence she'd installed herself last month. Every post was upright, every panel locked into place, no violations. Not by any standard that made sense, unless sense didn't matter. By the barn, her neighbor Curtis leaned on his rake, sipping from a gas station cup. Retired Marine, always watching, always quiet. "You good?" he asked without looking up. "For now," she answered. Curtis took a sip. "I saw it. Yesterday. Let me guess. Someone already posted the video. 3 different angles," he muttered. Facebook lit up like a 4th of July drunk tank. "They're calling you aggressive." Danielle sighed. "Of course they are." "Thing is," Curtis added, "they edited out the part where that meathead grabbed you first. They always do." He finally looked up. "You want me to say something? Post the uncut?" "No," she said quickly. "Not yet." Curtis raised a brow. "You planning to wait it out?" Danielle shook her head slowly. "I'm planning to watch what they do next." He nodded once, then went back to raking leaves like he'd just gotten his orders. That was the thing about veterans. No need to explain. They saw beyond the noise. Back inside, Danielle opened her laptop. HOA emails flooded her inbox. The subject lines told the story before she even clicked. Notice of violation. Non-compliant flag display. Request for immediate HOA hearing attendance. Security review pending. Urgent response requested. She scrolled without reading until she hit the one with attachments. Photos. Screenshots. Still frames of her takedown on the lawn, spliced and angled to make her look unhinged. Underneath, a formal demand to appear before the HOA disciplinary board within 72 hours. Danielle closed the laptop. At exactly 10 a.m., a knock came at the door. 3 sharp raps. She opened it to find a teenager in a yellow vest that read, HOA Courier. His eyes didn't meet hers. He just held out a manila envelope with trembling hands. "Are you Danielle Brooks?" he asked. "Yes." This is for you. They told me to give it to you in person." He looked like he wanted to vanish. She nodded once and took the envelope. As he backed away down the steps, she called after him. "What's your name?" The kid hesitated. "Nico." "You don't need to do this, Nico." I need the money," he mumbled and jogged off. Danielle opened the envelope. Inside was another notice, this time citing a new rule, Section 14.2, regarding exterior conduct detrimental to neighborhood peace. No explanation, just a date, a hearing. And a signature, Marlene Thatcher, HOA President. Danielle set the letter on the counter, carefully, like it might explode. Then she picked up her phone. "Jackson," she said when the call connected. "You sure about this?" The voice replied. Male, southern drawl buried beneath military tone. "They're digging in. And they're coordinated. You want to pull the trigger on the file?" "Not yet, but I need a second pair of eyes. I'm in Atlanta. Give me 12 hours. Come through the south tree line. I don't want them knowing I called backup." "Copy." Danielle hung up, exhaled slowly, and turned toward the window. Across the street, Marlene stood in her driveway, arms crossed, watching. They were baiting her. And the more Danielle stayed silent, the more they'd provoke. That night, a drone buzzed low over her backyard. Not military, not police. Civilian. HOA markings stenciled in white under the wings. Danielle didn't reach for her weapon. She reached for the garden hose and blasted it straight out of the air. The drone sparked and spiraled into the compost bin. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. This time, Curtis was at the door. He held the downed drone like it was roadkill. "Found this in your tomatoes," he said. "They're escalating." "They're scared." "Of what?" she asked. Curtis handed her the drone. "Of whatever they don't understand. And whatever they can't control." Danielle set the drone on the porch railing. "They're going to twist this, Curtis. Paint me as unstable. Dangerous. A threat. Then make sure when the truth comes out, it hits harder than they ever expected." She nodded once. Then something across the street caught her eye. Movement in Marlene's house. Lights flickered. A silhouette at the window, holding a phone, speaking fast. Curtis followed her gaze. "She's not done," he said. "No," Danielle murmured. "She's just getting started." And neither of them knew. So was Danielle. By the time Jackson arrived that evening, the sky had dipped into deep orange, and the neighborhood was uncomfortably quiet. Too quiet. Danielle met him behind the barn, her stance tense, shoulders squared. "You walked the south line?" she asked. "Twice," Jackson replied, scanning the yard. "No movement, but your neighbor's lawn gnome is wired with a thermal cam." Danielle gave a tight nod. "That's Curtis, paranoid but reliable." Jackson grinned. "My kind of guy." He handed her a small black pouch. She unzipped it to reveal a flash drive, a burner phone, and a folded map marked with 3 red X's. "What's this?" "HOA security routes. Their internal chatter from the last week." "Audio from the drone's uplink before you shot it out of the sky." She raised a brow. "Public frequency, sloppy encryption." "Sound familiar?" "Too familiar," she muttered. Jackson leaned against a post. "Danielle, they're not just reacting. They're organizing, coordinated movements, timed patrols, standard formation spacing. This isn't a neighborhood watch. This is tactical." Danielle's jaw clenched. "I know." He glanced at her, face serious now. "You think Marlene's connected?" "She's pulling the strings, but someone else is feeding her the intel." "Someone with training?" Jackson nodded. "I did a reverse lookup on one of the HOA volunteers who showed up yesterday. Guy's name is Evan Rourke. Used to be private security for Eastgate Tactical, same firm we tangled with in Kandahar." Danielle went still. "They work black contracts now." "Exactly," Jackson said. They're not just playing bully with bylaws, they're testing responses, measuring escalation. A pause. They're probing you. Danielle looked down at the flash drive in her hand. And I've been playing defense. Not anymore. That night, Danielle opened a storage locker hidden beneath the floorboards of the guest room. Inside, she pulled out a waterproof case. She opened it slowly. Gloves, old uniforms, a few encrypted ID badges, and one well-worn Navy SEAL patch. She hadn't looked at it in years. She didn't need to. The next morning, she was already up before dawn. Coffee black, boots laced. She moved with purpose through her house, checking windows, noting angles. A muscle memory she hadn't needed in years reawakened like it never left. Curtis spotted her from his porch. "You're not pacing anymore," he called. "No," she replied. "I'm preparing." He nodded slowly. "Good." At exactly 7:12 a.m., a white SUV pulled into her driveway. 3 people exited. Evan Rourke was among them, clipboard in hand, sunglasses in place. The woman beside him wore a crisp blouse and a condescending smile. The third was Nico, the teenager from earlier, looking thoroughly uncomfortable. Danielle stepped onto the porch before they could knock. "Back again," she said, voice calm. "This is a compliance recheck," the woman said, "following multiple reports of resident instability and possible aggression." "Resident instability?" Danielle repeated. "You mean the footage you edited to make me look like a threat?" Rourke smirked, but said nothing. The woman pressed on. "We're here under HOA code enforcement. You are required to allow inspection." "No," Danielle said simply. "You're on private property. Unless you have a court order, you're trespassing." Rourke took a step forward. "You gonna stop us?" "I won't have to," she replied, eyes locked on Nico. The kid shifted uncomfortably. Danielle stepped down, voice lower now, just for him. "Nico, look at me." He did. Reluctantly, "You know this isn't right. You don't want to be part of this. I'm just following—" "You're better than this. You can walk away. Right now." For a moment it looked like he would. His eyes darted between her and the others. Then he stepped back. "I'm out," he mumbled. The woman scowled. "That's a violation of your contracted duties." "I don't care," Nico muttered, and turned, walking back to the SUV. Danielle's gaze shifted back to Rourke. "Guess you're short one recruit." Rourke's smirk vanished. "Don't think this is over." Danielle stepped forward, unblinking. "Oh, I know it's not, but you're not the one who decides when it ends." They left in silence, but not before Rourke turned at the end of the driveway and said just loud enough for her to hear, "You should have stayed in the shadows, Seal." Danielle froze. Not because of the threat, but because of what it meant. They knew. Back inside, she slammed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. Curtis was already on the radio. "They know," she said when she reached the porch. "I heard," he replied. "Then it changes everything." "Yep," Curtis said grimly. "Now it's not about rules. It's about survival." Danielle looked out at the neighborhood. The cul-de-sac, the painted mailboxes, the trimmed hedges hiding people who watched from behind curtains. The battlefield just got official. Danielle didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of the guest room bed, the old Navy SEAL patch lying face up on the nightstand beside her. Her fingers hovered over it, then moved to the burner phone Jackson had given her. No messages, no updates. Just silence. The kind of silence that always came before something loud. At 2:03 a.m., a soft tap on the back window pulled her attention. She was already on her feet, hand on the grip of the Glock beneath the nightstand, when Curtis's voice hissed through the darkness. "They're moving." She slipped out the back, silent as breath, boots crunching lightly against the dew-soaked grass. Curtis handed her a pair of night vision goggles and a thermal scanner. "South Trail," he whispered. 3 figures, no lights. "No pets." She nodded. "What's Walt say?" "Radio silence. He's staying dark." Danielle's jaw tightened. If Walt was quiet, that meant something worse than surveillance. It meant infiltration. She ducked behind the shed, eyes locked on the scanner. 3 heat signatures moved in a staggered line, roughly 20 yards apart, slow, cautious. They weren't walking dogs. They were sweeping a perimeter. Military style. Danielle crept to the fence line. The moonlight cut sharp angles across her face as she scanned the tree line. There. Movement. The tallest of the 3 ducked behind a bush, raised something long and angular. Not binoculars, not a camera, a scoped rifle. Danielle's breath hitched, then slowed. She lowered herself into the shadow of the rose bushes and clicked on her mic. "Jackson." "They're armed." His voice crackled through the earpiece. "Copy. Confirm identity?" "Negative." "But formation and posture match recon sweep." He sighed. "Guess they're done pretending." One of the shadows stepped into the clearing near the chicken coop. Danielle recognized the shape, the gait, the cocky tilt of the head. Rourke. He raised a small device to his lips. 2 minutes, he whispered into it. Danielle didn't wait to find out what the countdown led to. She moved fast, silently flanking him through the bushes, every step calculated. As she came up behind him, she caught a flicker of movement to the right. The third man, a wide-shouldered brute in black tactical gear, was doubling back. They were boxing her in. She dropped into a low crouch and tossed a pebble behind a tree to her left. The big guy turned. Wrong move. She struck fast, landing a sharp elbow into his throat, followed by a sweep that took out his knees. He hit the dirt with a dull thud. Rourke spun around, weapon raised, but Danielle was already on him. She caught his wrist, twisted until the device clattered to the ground, and slammed him against the fence post. "Surprised to see me?" she growled. His lip curled. "Actually, no. I was hoping." Danielle blinked. A low whirring noise started behind her. She turned. A drone, barely audible, hovered 10 feet off the ground, red light blinking, recording. They'd baited her. "Smile, Lieutenant," Rourke hissed. "This is going viral." Danielle grabbed the device from the ground and hurled it at the drone. It clipped the rotor, sending the machine spinning into the dirt in a crack of metal and sparks. She spun back just as Rourke reached for his sidearm. But Curtis was already there. He stepped out from the trees with a homemade slingshot and let loose a marble-sized steel bearing that struck Rourke's hand mid-reach. Rourke screamed, cradling his wrist. "You good?" Curtis asked. Danielle nodded. "Better now." They tied up Rourke and the other man with zip ties and duct tape from Curtis's tool belt. Danielle turned her attention to the small comm device that had dropped from Rourke's hand. She pressed a button. A voice answered instantly. "Status?" She didn't speak. "Rourke. Do you have visual on the target?" Still silence. The voice tensed. "Initiate fallback plan." Click. The line went dead. Danielle looked at Curtis. This wasn't just an intimidation run. Curtis's eyes narrowed. "So what's fallback mean?" She picked up the comms unit and tucked it into her vest. "We're not going to wait to find out." By morning, word had already spread across the HOA's encrypted channels. Danielle intercepted the chatter using a network of old radio relays patched through Curtis's shed. She and Jackson spent the day scanning hours of recorded audio and internal emails dumped by an anonymous whistleblower known only as Junebug. The information confirmed what she'd feared. The HOA, under Marlene's leadership, had hired private contractors from Eastgate Tactical to enforce compliance in high-conflict zones, code for bullying residents who pushed back. She wasn't the first target, just the most dangerous one. That evening, Danielle stood in front of her living room window as the sun dipped behind the horizon. She could feel the battle lines hardening. This wasn't about fences anymore, or noise complaints, or mailbox height. This was a war over control. And she was done playing defense. From behind her, Jackson approached, holding a flash drive. Footage from last night. Already scrubbed, cleaned, time-stamped. You ready to go public? Danielle stared at her reflection in the glass. No, she said softly. I'm ready to go tactical. And the fight was just getting started. The sun hadn't even fully risen when Danielle found herself sitting at her kitchen table, staring at the dismantled pieces of the comms device she'd taken from Rourke. Beside it, Jackson hunched over a burner laptop, his eyes tracking lines of code like a predator watching prey. The air in the room was tight with silence, not tension, not fear. Focus. This thing's not just standard encrypted, Jackson said finally. It's laced with bouncing protocols. Military grade, and not American. Danielle looked up. Contractors? He nodded. Foreign trained, likely outsourced through shell firms. We're talking mercs with diplomatic paper shields. Her fingers clenched around her coffee mug. And Marlene's pulling the strings. Or she's just a face. The real muscle might be buried deeper. HOA is the storefront. The rot is behind the walls. She stood, grabbing her tactical jacket from the chair. Then we start kicking down walls. Jackson reached for her arm. Danny, if we move too fast, we expose our cards. They're already trying to paint you as the threat. Let them, she said flatly. Truth doesn't need permission. Across the street, Curtis was already in motion, planting a new series of motion sensors around the property. His drone buzzed overhead, sweeping the yard with silent vigilance. He looked up as Danielle approached. They've been probing all night, he said. 4 passes near the utility line, 2 slow rolls past the back road. You know what that means? They're looking for a soft spot, she replied. They're gonna find something else. Danielle smirked and reached into her jacket, pulling out a hard case. Inside were 4 titanium discs, each one marked with a series of Navy SEAL operation codes. She placed one in Curtis's palm. He raised an eyebrow. What is it? Leverage. Data bomb. Once uploaded, it pings every node connected to their network and releases timestamps, audio files, and GPS logs tied to their black bag ops. It's not just a firewall breaker. It's an extinction event. Curtis gave a low whistle. Where'd you even get this? She smiled faintly. Built it in Kandahar. Modified it in Djibouti. Never thought I'd need it in a cul-de-sac. That evening, she and Jackson sat in front of a massive bulletin board filled with pinned documents, maps, and strings connecting photos and memos. Danielle stared at a picture of Marlene, standing next to a man in a black polo with a badge clipped to his belt. That's not security, she said. That's command. Jackson leaned in. You recognize him? She nodded slowly. Major Thomas Creed. Used to run black site logistics out of Bahrain. He vanished after a court-martial got swept under the rug. Now he's running HOA security? Jackson asked. Looks like it, and Marlene's hiding behind him like he's a firewall, but even firewalls burn. Later that night, as the moon cast sharp shadows across the field, Danielle suited up. She moved with precision, silent boots, black utility pants, compression gloves. Her face was calm, but her eyes were storms. Curtis handed her a walkie. Back up? No. If I go loud, it's already too late. Just keep the cameras hot. She slipped past the perimeter, moving through the dark like a ghost. Her target wasn't Marlene, not yet. It was a property 2 streets over, listed as a vacant HOA maintenance site. But Danielle knew a staging post when she saw one. She bypassed the outer fence, cut the motion sensor feed with a signal jammer, and entered the structure through a side hatch. Inside, the air smelled of ozone and solvent. Surveillance feeds flickered on a wall of monitors. Maps, blueprints, and dossiers covered the table. She moved closer. Her eyes narrowed. One of the files was labeled Danielle Moore, Classification Critical Threat. Her military photo was pinned next to the word Extract or Neutralize. Danielle exhaled slowly. Beneath it, a second file. Jackson Rayner, known associate, civilian. Her hand clenched, and then the floor creaked. She spun. Rourke stood in the hallway, bandaged, bruised, but smirking. Told them you'd come. Danielle didn't flinch. You baited me. No, I exposed you. They needed proof of who you were. Now we have it. He raised a hand to a camera in the corner. Smile again, Lieutenant. This time, we're live. Danielle's gaze tracked the room, locating the exit points, the angles, the threat. But Rourke didn't move to fight. He didn't even step closer. He pressed a button on a tablet. Every monitor in the room lit up, her face from the altercation by the chicken coop to the fight near the fence line. Edited. Chopped, twisted. A voiceover began. Ex-military operative turned violent vigilante. Disturbing footage leaked today shows former Navy SEAL Danielle Moore engaging in what appears to be premeditated assaults on HOA personnel. Danielle's breath caught in her chest. Not fear. Rage. Rourke whispered. You might be trained for combat, but you can't win a war of perception. She stepped forward slowly, her voice low and sharp. No. But I can make sure you never walk out of this room. Rourke laughed. Behind him, the power cut. Darkness. Danielle had already moved. When the backup lights flickered on, Rourke was on the ground, unconscious. The tablets smashed. The drives removed. Danielle stood over him, breath steady. Curtis's voice crackled over the comm. You good? Danielle didn't answer immediately. Then, send the footage to Mia. The lawyer? She'll know what to do. Danielle stepped outside, the wind catching her braids as she stared up at the stars. They'd made their move. Now it was her turn. Danielle didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the window, cross-legged, her fingers twitching near the knife holstered on her thigh. The adrenaline hadn't faded. It had evolved, hardened into something clearer, colder. Purpose. Across the street, Curtis's drone hovered silently just above the tree line, its blinking red light pulsing like a heartbeat. Inside, Jackson paced. He'd just returned from Mia's law office, visibly shaken. She says it's war now, he muttered, running a hand over his beard. HOA filed a temporary injunction against you this morning. Claims you're impersonating military personnel, tampering with surveillance infrastructure, and endangering the community. Danielle looked up, calm. They're trying to flip the narrative. They're not trying. They've already done it, Jackson snapped, tossing a printed headline onto the table. It read, Black Ops trained woman terrorizes HOA in quiet suburb. Beneath it, a still from the hacked footage, Danielle crouched beside an unconscious Rourke, expression unreadable. She picked it up, studied it. They don't even bother hiding the racism anymore. Curtis radioed in. Marlene's SUV just pulled into the main clubhouse. Lights on. 5 others joined. They're not giving up. Danielle stood. Good. Neither are we. By mid-morning, Danielle walked into the county records office under a hoodie and sunglasses, accompanied by Mia. The young civil rights attorney carried a black briefcase and a jawline so sharp it could file lawsuits by itself. "We hit them where it hurts," Mia said as they moved through security. "Their paperwork." They met with the clerk, an older man with tired eyes and a nameplate that read, Arthur. Mia smiled politely. "We're requesting public access to HOA and corporation records, tax status, financial filings, and any documents relating to their internal security policies." Arthur blinked. "You're suing a homeowners association?" "No," Danielle said. "We're about to dismantle one." He swallowed and typed. A few minutes later, they had hard copies of bylaws, signatory sheets, and property use permits, each line reviewed with cold efficiency. "They've classified part of the neighborhood as private security zones," Mia muttered. "No legal basis, just words." "Sounds official, but it's all fake authority." "Good," Danielle said, "because I'm done playing defense." Back home, Curtis was already prepping the ranch, cameras rewired. Driveway sensors replaced with dual-frequency scanners. Danielle walked the perimeter silently, every step calculated. Every angle memorized. That night they met in the barn. Mia, Curtis, Jackson, all seated around the makeshift war table, literally an old dining table littered with flash drives, maps, and blueprints. Danielle stood at the head. "They've declared war on me because they think I'm dangerous. They're right. But not in the way they expect." She pulled down a rolled blueprint and spread it wide. "This is their next move." The map was of the neighborhood. One section highlighted in red, Phase 4 expansion area. A cul-de-sac that had mysteriously been marked for Community Beautification Initiative. Curtis leaned in. "That's code for demolition. They want to force out the last 3 homeowners who haven't caved to HOA rules," Danielle said. "And they'll use intimidation if needed. 2 of them are elderly. One has stage 2 cancer." Mia's voice sharpened. "We expose this. It's over for them." "No," Danielle said quietly. "It won't be over until they know what it's like to be watched, hunted, cornered." Jackson stiffened. "You're scaring me again, Danny." She looked at him, calm. "I'm not trying to. I'm just done being scared myself." Curtis smiled faintly. "I like this version of you." The next day, things escalated fast. 2 HOA enforcers, new faces, bulky, tatted, showed up outside Danielle's ranch. No clipboard. Just one holding a camera, the other holding a taser. "We're conducting a compliance inspection," one said, smug. "You're being recorded for your protection." Danielle stood at the gate, unflinching. "Then you better hit record twice. You're gonna want this in high definition." Behind her, a speaker clicked on. Walt's voice boomed from the barn. "Gentlemen, you are currently trespassing on private land not under HOA jurisdiction. This has been confirmed by legal counsel and the county assessor's office. You have exactly 10 seconds to leave." They hesitated. Then Danielle pulled something from her pocket. It looked like a garage remote, but when she clicked it, a high-pitched whine began to echo through the air. The men winced, staggered back. "What is that?" Curtis's voice came from the porch. "Sonic deterrent. Non-lethal." "But your ears will ring for hours." The men stumbled back toward their SUV, muttering threats. As they drove off, Danielle whispered, "One step closer, and they'll learn what it means to pick a fight with someone trained to win wars, not Facebook debates." Later that night, the footage of the confrontation made its way onto social media, but this time the angle had changed. Walt had released a raw drone feed of the enforcers trespassing, taser in hand. No edits, no sound bites, just truth. The internet noticed. Within hours, hashtags began trending. Protect Danielle. HOA abuse. Stand with her, Curtis. Watch the feed explode online. You just went viral, he said. Danielle didn't even blink. Good, she said. Let them all see, but this isn't over until Marlene falls. As the house fell quiet, Jackson found her outside again, sharpening a knife beside the porch light. You ever think about walking away? He asked gently. Every day, she replied. And every day I remember the look on those old folks' faces when HOA thugs circled their homes like predators. That's why I stay. He nodded. Just don't lose yourself in the fight. Danielle paused, staring at the blade. That version of me? She never belonged in the suburbs anyway. And with that, the line between homeowner and operative blurred even more. They wanted a villain? They should have picked someone else. The sun hadn't even risen when Danielle heard the crunch of gravel. She was already awake. She hadn't really slept, only sat, eyes half closed, listening. Every creak in the wood of the house, every rustle of wind outside had kept her sharp. The feeling in the air had changed. It wasn't tension anymore. It was calculation. Curtis's voice crackled over the radio. 4 vehicles, 2 SUVs, a van, and what looks like a media truck. Looks like they brought cameras. Danielle didn't respond. She was already lacing up her boots. Outside, Marlene stood in the middle of the road, flanked by a pair of private security guards in black uniforms with gold-stitched patches that said, Community Enforcement. Behind them, a cameraman aimed his lens directly at Danielle's gate. Curtis cursed under his breath. They're staging it. They're gonna bait you. Danielle opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, slow and deliberate. Jackson joined her a moment later, holding a mug of coffee with shaking hands. She brought media, he muttered. She's trying to paint you as the problem again. Danielle smiled faintly. Let her. Marlene stepped forward, waving a laminated sheet toward the camera. This woman has repeatedly violated HOA Code 41B, Subclause 2. She's building unauthorized fortifications on her property. The board has determined she poses a threat to community safety. Danielle raised her voice, calm but cutting. What you call fortification, I call protection. From trespassers like the ones who assaulted me on my own land. Marlene ignored her. She turned to the camera. We're calling on the county to intervene. We believe this resident is engaged in paramilitary behavior in a residential zone. The cameraman zoomed in on Danielle. Do you have a comment, ma'am? Danielle stepped off the porch. Everyone went silent. She walked up to the fence line, close enough that the guards shifted uneasily. You're broadcasting lies on my property. That's trespassing, and it ends now. Marlene smirked. You don't get to decide that anymore. The board is filing a civil injunction. This entire incident is being recorded. Danielle glanced at the cameraman, then said clearly, Good. Because I have something for your audience. She reached into her jacket. The guards twitched, one hand moving toward his belt. But Danielle didn't draw a weapon. She pulled out a flash drive. This contains footage of HOA security contractors entering my land without a warrant. It shows your people tackling me to the ground, trying to detain me while I was unarmed. It also includes audio, one of your own people saying, Use the wife, he'll snap. The cameraman hesitated. Is that true? Marlene's smirk slipped. Danielle turned to him. Want to see it? He lowered the camera slightly. I do. Curtis stepped forward with a tablet, already queued up. He hit play. The footage was clear. High-res drone cam, audio enhanced. The hit, the blood, the silence afterward. The cameraman's face paled. Marlene hissed, "Turn that off!" Danielle didn't move. "What's the matter?" Didn't think the narrative would flip that fast? Jackson leaned closer to her. "We just got a notification from Mia. Court hearing's been moved up to tomorrow. Emergency motion granted. They're on the ropes." Danielle's voice was low. "Then let's finish this." Later that night, the porch was quiet again. Curtis sat beside Danielle, radio in hand. "You think Marlene's done?" Danielle shook her head. "She's desperate. People like her don't quit until they lose something that matters." He glanced over. "And what are you gonna take?" Danielle stared out into the darkness. Her platform. Her power. Her illusion of control. Inside, Jackson paced in the kitchen, watching the footage loop again on the monitor. "You were right to wait," he said. "You knew they'd try to go public before we did." Danielle nodded. "They want attention. I want accountability." Curtis tilted his head. "You know what you're becoming, right?" She looked at him. He grinned. "A myth." Danielle didn't laugh. But she didn't argue either. At 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. It was a message from Mia. "We have the paper trail. HOA payments to private firms, contracts tied to former military personnel, unauthorized surveillance equipment ordered under false HOA codes." Danielle exhaled. "That's the match." Curtis turned. "Then tomorrow we light the fire." But Danielle wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the window. Marlene stood there, on the sidewalk, alone, holding something in her hands. Danielle stepped outside. They stood 10 feet apart. "You shouldn't be here," Danielle said. Marlene's voice shook, not with fear, but rage. "You ruined everything. My reputation, my board, my neighborhood." "No," Danielle said. "You did that when you crossed the line." Marlene threw the envelope at her feet. "You'll regret this. They're not going to stop at a lawsuit." Danielle picked it up slowly. "Neither am I." Marlene's eyes burned. "You think you're untouchable? I know people too." Danielle didn't blink. "Then tell them to bring everything. I'll still be standing when they run out." Marlene hesitated. Then she turned and walked into the dark, heels crunching gravel, pride shattered behind her. Danielle whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "You picked the wrong woman." Because the war wasn't just about fences and bylaws anymore. It was about the truth. And tomorrow, the world would hear it. The county courthouse didn't look like much. Brick, beige, boring. But that morning, it felt like the center of gravity had shifted. Reporters clustered around the front steps. Microphones, cameras, tripods, an entire ecosystem of judgment perched outside a place that claimed to dispense justice. Danielle stepped out of the SUV, wearing a dark blazer and boots that didn't scuff. Her expression didn't twitch. Curtis walked beside her in his usual low-key gear, while Jackson held the documents like they were sacred texts. Mia, dressed like she could tear apart an oil executive with a sentence, led the way. Inside, the courtroom was packed. HOA board members sat stiff-backed in the front row. Marlene was there, pale, lips pressed into a line that had nothing left to smile with. Across the aisle sat members of the community, neighbors, former skeptics, and a few familiar faces who'd once watched from behind their fences, but now watched with something close to awe. Judge Reyes entered. Everyone stood. When he spoke, his voice didn't need a microphone. "I've reviewed both sets of evidence. One side brings video clips curated for effect, edited to frame the accused as dangerous. The other brings raw footage, financial records, and legal affidavits, which paint a very different picture. He turned to the HOA's lawyer. You claim your board acted in the best interest of the community. Can you explain the surveillance equipment purchased under unauthorized fund allocations? Or why your security contractors used force on an unarmed civilian? The lawyer stuttered. Marlene's eyes darted to the floor. Danielle said nothing. She didn't have to. Reyes continued. I also note that Ms. Brooks, formerly Navy SEAL Lieutenant Commander, was not just targeted unlawfully, but framed. This court finds the HOA board in violation of multiple state statutes, including illegal surveillance, falsified code enforcement, and abuse of authority. A ripple went through the room. The judge dropped the gavel. Effective immediately, the HOA board is disbanded. All active fines and enforcement claims are nullified. Civil damages to Ms. Brooks will be determined in a separate hearing. And I suggest every member of this board secure legal counsel. He stood. This hearing is over. Outside, the sun felt warmer. The crowd had questions. Microphones rushed forward. Reporters called Danielle's name. She raised a hand. Just one. I'm not here to gloat, she said. I'm here to remind you what happens when people are underestimated, threatened, and pushed to their limits. A pause. I didn't win because I was a SEAL. I won because I didn't stop. She turned to walk away, then stopped. To anyone watching this who's ever been silenced, bullied, or backed into a corner, don't fold. Document everything, speak up, push back. Because the system isn't built to protect you, but that doesn't mean you can't make it listen. That night, Danielle sat on the porch again, but this time the silence was real, not heavy. Not loaded, just quiet. Jackson brought her a glass of tea. You know, most people would have taken the settlement and disappeared. I didn't fight to disappear, she said. I fought to make sure no one else has to go through what I did. Curtis joined them, holding up his phone. You've gone viral. That speech? 500,000 shares already. People are fired up. She raised an eyebrow. Let them be. The real work starts after the cameras leave. He looked at her with a half smile. You ever think about running for office? Not unless I can do it in combat boots. They laughed. Leah, the neighbor once too afraid to speak out, came by with brownies and a thank you. Others followed. Slowly. A nod here, a handshake there, trust rebuilding itself like muscle after trauma. As the sun dropped behind the hills, Danielle looked out across her land. Still scarred, still hers. I didn't want to be anyone's symbol, she whispered. Jackson touched her hand. But maybe it's not about being a symbol, he said. Maybe it's just about showing people what's possible. Danielle exhaled. Not tired, just still. This wasn't the end. Not really, but it was peace. For now. If this story moved you, if you believe in justice, in truth, in the power of standing your ground, even when the odds are stacked against you, then support this channel. Like, share, and subscribe to help us keep telling the stories that matter. Stories that challenge, that expose, and that inspire. This is more than content. This is a movement. Because no one's voice deserves to be silenced, especially not yours.